So Doug and Indy, thank you for taking a couple of minutes to hang out with us and to do this. As I said, not much to talk about, not much going on that could be of relevance to these issues. I'm being a little sarcastic here. But I did feel like it was probably helpful to set the stage for some of what we're talking about today and then tomorrow at the Policy Summit with a little bit of a high level kind of left-right view from Washington, previewing some of what we expect as some of the coming social insurance debates. And I want to say another shameless plug for the Policy Summit tomorrow. We're going to be getting into detail about a lot of those tomorrow, whether that's long-term care or Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security, et cetera. But it felt like that was the right place to tee some of that up today. And so just to kick us off, and Indy, I think I'm going to start with you. What do you see as some of the most significant threats facing social insurance in this new Congress and administration?
Well, first, thank you, Rebecca. Congratulations on being the still newish CEO. And for folks who have any doubt about Rebecca's commitment to the Academy, look at the logo for the Academy, wherever you can see it in this tree, and make sure at the reception you see her earrings. Because I don't know if those are custom made or what, but it just shows her commitment to the Academy. Some people wear these things on their sleeves, some on their ears, but the tattoo. Oh, yes. But
we digress.
But look, there's a lot of uncertainty. It's true. There's a lot of uncertainty. I can say something now. One of you can read your phone and tell me that's what's true 5 minutes ago is no longer true. So I think there are a lot of potential risks. And why don't we just go through a few? One is, first of all, I tend to think of social insurance more broadly than just contributory programs. And we have, at the state level, in addition to some of the federal level ones, some programs that don't directly interact with the federal ones, especially in paid family medical leave, right? But at the federal level, broadly, if you decide, as the president seems to be insisting on, that he won't cut Social Security benefits, won't cut Medicare benefits for seniors, and that you are not willing to raise net new revenues, and you are not willing to pull back on defense spending, there's not that much non-defense discretionary spending to squeeze. And let's assume for a second that we keep paying our interest payments, we make our debt service payments, okay? That's a huge amount, right? Right now, I believe it exceeds even our defense spending every year. So what is left? What is left includes Medicaid. It certainly includes SNAP, but it actually could include disability programs too, whether it's SSI or potentially SSDI. They're not very clear about this. So that's just a set of risks potentially in budget reconciliation. We have some novel risks today related to freezing all federal spending, and then there are some confusing exemptions related to money that goes to individuals. Then Social Security and Medicare for elderly, as I mentioned, were exempt. I don't know if anyone has more clarity today or this week. Part of the point, I think, is there's going to be challenges to the Impoundment Control Act, right? And so constitutional challenges. Let's put that aside for a second if we can. There are some policies like exempting Social Security payments from taxation, right? Already a lot of Social Security benefits are exempt from taxation, but the president seems to want to go further, right? Well, that has implications for the trust fund, as we know, because those funds can go back into the trust fund, right? Then we've got questions on Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act around basically potentially risking unraveling the sort of market or just bumping a bunch of people off Medicaid. And that can happen through a whole bunch of means. One is shifting the responsibility to states, who are almost certainly generally not going to step up if they have to cover a greater share. In fact, some states have automatic provisions to not step up as it relates to the expansion population. Someone pointed out to me today, we're a country that's growing older, we have fewer kids, and so when you think about the Medicaid expansion population targeted towards adults, right, who are often not raising children, this is a bigger sort of share of the population and a bigger sort of concern over time. I think if there are opportunities, it might be that we will see increasing bipartisan support for some of these programs in response to some of the challenges and threats. But I don't want to be, too naive here. Realistically, there's a lot of pressure to cut the programs that a lot of us care about.
So a lot packed into that answer. And like I said, a lot of those conversations are going to get unpacked further tomorrow, and you'll actually be moderating one of those panels among some other people who are in this room. Doug, what do you want to add to that?
Well, let me echo my thanks for being here. My congratulations to both of you. And let me say really three things. The first is the one risk I'm real sure is going to come to fruition is that we will not undertake a revisiting of Social Security that would make it financially sustainable over the foreseeable future. And that I view as just an ongoing tragedy. I talk to members and I try to explain to them that if you're 55 years old and you're thinking about retiring in 10 years, you don't know what your benefit's going to be, which is a horrible way to run a pension program. And we are overdue to take on making that a sustainable part of our social safety net, and that's going to happen again. So that's sort of point number one, and see you next year. Second, and this is the broad framing of things that's the problem. If you do things for budgetary reasons, you usually get bad policy. The starting point should be the policy you want, and then you put it into a budget framework. If you're just cutting and you got to find something to cut, you usually do it in a way which is not desirable for anyone. And so the major job of organizations like NACI and anyone who cares about the integrity of our social safety net programs and the mandatory spending programs that finance them is to explain what is good and bad policy, and to not simply cut for the sake of cutting to hit a number. That's a real danger in the way things are being framed right now, and I worry a lot about that. And then on this business of the freeze, let me just say, so I'm a former director of the Congressional Budget Office, and I unfortunately read things like the Budget and Impoundment Control Act, and Section 1012B is very clear. Everyone's read this, I know. The president can pause spending, and upon pausing the spending, send a special notification to Congress that he or she does not think it's wise to do this spending. No such notification's been sent, so note that for the record. And then within 45 days, Congress has to say, yeah, we agree with you, or no, we don't. And if they don't agree, off it goes. This is the rescission process. The Trump administration has picked this fight. They have foreshadowed that they're going to pick this fight. They believe the Impoundment Act is unconstitutional and that the president has authorities inherently to not spend money that Congress has appropriated and has authorized. And that's where this is going. I think it ends up very quickly at the Supreme Court, and I think he loses. But we will suffer the uncertainties that Indy talked about in the interim, and that's not a good news story. I mean, there are transitions all the time, and I've been in 2 White Houses, been at the CBO, have watched the transitions. It is always the case that the incoming administration asks the agency, please don't go ahead with anything new, important, novel until we get our people in place and we can make appropriate decision making, given that we're now running the government. But the day-to-day stuff shouldn't stop. And what they've done is just be, as usual, be overly broad in their exercise of what is a traditional authority, and we're seeing the fallout from it.
Staying with you for just a moment, Doug, another one syllable word that is on everyone's lips as well, of course, is Doge. I'm curious how we see Doge fitting in, as you were talking about cutting just to find places to cut.
Doge ruined my dry January. Doge was for a long time a small group outside the government who had lots and lots of ideas about better ways to configure the government, its scope, its scale, and its efficiencies. I call that a think tank. I run a think tank. They're not particularly powerful, and Doge was not a particularly interesting entity in my view. I was a big Doge skeptic. They've now put it inside the government in what used to be the United States Digital Service. If you look at the executive order that did it, it gives it a very circumscribed mission. It is there to modernize technologies. It's unobjectionable. I think that'd be great. It says you may not do OMB's job, you may not do a budget job. So they've really taken it down a notch from its original grand dreams. Vivek has departed for Ohio. I think it remains to be seen. Like when we get to the end of the day, near on July 4th, 2026, what will Doge actually deliver? I hope they deliver on their stated mandate, the technology mandate. I don't think they're really going to be able to pull off the other stuff. The ratio of talk to potential is very, very high.
Indy, your thoughts on Doge? And perhaps dry January as well.
Look, I think that a lot of people would be surprised by some of the facts we take for granted, that once you add up Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense, and interest on the debt, there's actually just not a lot left in spending. And I think people need to sort of understand where the federal government acts and where it spends its money. And in that sense, if it can be an opportunity, great. I agree with Doug. Look, across administrations, people have wanted to modernize technology. A major part of the ACA was actually subsidizing states to modernize technology. They were giving very healthy subsidies and matches, right, to have states do that, to administer the expansions of Medicaid, the premium tax credits, but also to share across programs. We want people to get the help that they need. But I would be also careful, whether it's through Doge or otherwise, by this idea of we are going to make sure a program works for those who truly need it. We see that quite a lot. And the truth is, you can see this in healthcare and elsewhere, but people can work full-time in this country and need lots of public supports. That's with or without having dependents. That's really important to acknowledge. America has chosen a path of disproportionately high share of jobs being very poorly compensated compared to other countries who are sort of peers. So typically, when you look at the share of jobs that are below 60% of median in wages and earnings in the US, we rank somewhere at the bottom of OECD countries, maybe around like 36 of 38. We have now just gone through the longest stretch in US history since we enacted a federal minimum wage increase without a federal minimum wage increase. And there are places, like I've been doing some work in Louisiana, where they're just not going to enact a separate minimum wage. Look, I get that there's a case for a lower sort of minimum wage in Northwest Arkansas than in Washington, D.C., and we're seeing that. But I say all this because I think it's very important to realize that the vast majority of public benefits are, one, tied to work, and two, that they're necessary for a lot of people who are working full time.
Can I follow up?
I had a feeling you might want to.
So let me say a couple more things about this. I've ended up talking to a lot of people about this. But first of all, they started from an incredibly low level. I was called by Doge. And so I get on the phone with the Dogers or whatever you call a Doge person. They're like, we have all these documents. The CBO has documents, OMB has documents, the Treasury has documents. They don't match. I was like, yeah, they do different jobs. Which one should we believe? Oh, I think you should believe all of them. What are you trying to do? We don't really know yet. So, okay, fine. So take a lot of the public pronouncements with a grain of salt. They really don't know what they're doing. I also want to say they could do a lot of good. Like, I personally think it's really embarrassing that we have a Department of Education that spends 3 years developing a financial aid application and it doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, they can't even go back to last year's model and have something that people can use. And so applications fall by 25% in 1 year and people aren't going to college. It's crazy. This seems like something they could fix. Good. I hope they do some good. I hope they do some very targeted good that we'd all benefit from. And let's cross our fingers and hope that's what it is.
I feel like, in full disclosure, I will say there has been one time I've heard the word Doge that made me smile and feel very good about myself. And that was when Doug called me Doji because I had made some of the Academy's board meetings more efficient. And but I knew it was a compliment. So thank you, Doug. So dare I ask whether you guys see any opportunities in this Congress or in this administration when it comes to social insurance? Either of you can take that first.
No, I'll go first so Indy can spend some time on it. No.
And Paul, here you thought you were the most concise board member. Indy.
Well,
I mean, it could be in technology, but I'm not sure. I mean, let's take unemployment insurance. So Doug makes a reasonable point about FAFSA. It was a disaster. And of course, the administration did what it's could. I will say we also had a data analysis problem if folks didn't know what happened. But then the National Clearinghouse, which produces data, said that enrollment fell, and people pointed to the debacle with FAFSA, the federal student aid application. And turned out that the data were wrong, and actually enrollment did rise. But nevertheless, there was nothing good about the FAFSA debacle, to be clear. So yes, and let's be clear though, the government mostly relies on they mostly rely on contractors for a lot of this work. It's not like they're sitting around doing everything in-house. So there's a lot of challenges there. Maybe we can do a better job there. I'm not super optimistic with Elon Musk, who himself depends heavily on federal funding, that we're going to get a lot of improvements in efficiencies and extracting more from contractors in these cases. But I guess hope springs eternal, but I hope somehow that people see at the end of this how important it is to have some of these programs. When you look at the way that last time around the administration took a lot of executive actions to undermine the ACA, you know that these programs are these sort of intricate, complex webs. We could have simpler programs, and it'd be nice if they were simpler for the people who actually depend on them. But you can easily destabilize these things. And I think that is the only sort of potential upside is people see the interdependence, whether it's health coverage or between disability retirement programs, or they see the broad support in general for these programs. That doesn't mean we shouldn't work to make them sustainable. I just, and we might have very different approaches in doing that. I'd be happy to lean very heavily on more revenues and taxes. But as Rebecca can talk about, we have good reason to believe there's at least sort of broad support for what these programs are trying to do.
No, and I appreciate you bringing that up. Go ahead, Doug. Yeah.
The reason I gave the answer I gave, which I think is correct, is there have been other periods when Republicans sort of had an alternative vision of what the social insurance world should look like, and were relatively unified in that vision. And in those circumstances, we've had vigorous debates over Social Security reform, future of the ACA, all those things. That's not where we are. There are about 4 different factions in the House alone on sort of where we ought to go and how we ought to do it. So I don't see legislative action as at all feasible. And I don't see, one thing I will say about candidate Trump is that when candidate Trump says something repeatedly, President Trump does it. Whether you like it or not, he does. If he said it, he does it. And he's not talked at all about these things. So there's no reason for me to think they will do anything on the executive front either.
Well, can I just add, there was a throwaway, I know you all were watching all the rallies, there was a throwaway line at Madison Square Garden. Does anyone remember this line about family caregivers, how
Yes.
we don't appreciate them enough and we're going to make sure we do? Might have been some mention of showing them love, I'm not sure. But so I bring that up because he hasn't said it again, but he did say it then. And so there is a caregiving tax sort of potential nexus. Again, it may not be a policy that we think is the right one or sound, and we'll have differing views on it, but it is interesting. Let me put what Doug said in different terms. Some of these issues, where there was more sort of alignment among Republicans, are more wedge issues. So there's a large number of Republicans now who are saying we should be net spending more on caregiving. Now, some of them will cut from something else that we may care about. So, but nevertheless, I think caregiving is an area where I expect to see some energy and action. And as someone who works a lot on supporting folks doing caregiving, whether professionally or as family caregivers, that's a good thing. And I may oppose the actual policies for various reasons. We should also, let me just put out on the table, sometimes there are policies then that undermine reproductive health for those of us who care about it. Sometimes the policies also will restrict access for immigrants, including citizen children, for those of us who care about their access, right? And there's other things that may be of concern to us, but I think caregiving is something that at least was talked about on the campaign trail.
Sure, everyone here did watch all of the rallies, Indy.
And if you didn't, there is actually a searchable online database that has every speech he gave at every rally. So if you ever have a slow day, you can find out.
Whew, I'm getting full body chills thinking about that. But I will say this though, and I'm curious your thoughts, especially on this, Indy. The great philosopher Joni Mitchell once said, "You don't know what you got till it's gone," and I feel like there's some of that right in the rear view as we think about 2017, 2018. Medicaid's never been so popular as when people realized it was on the chopping block, and the same with the ACA. Is that potentially maybe not a policy opportunity, but a narrative or an education opportunity in a moment like this if we do see those types of programs and others potentially at risk?
I think that's right. It is an opportunity, and you see that, especially when I talk to folks in rural areas. I don't know how many of us right now live or work in a rural area, but there is a lot of fear about what's going to happen to the providers and hospitals in rural areas who are heavily, heavily dependent on federal government programs that provide them the payments they need to literally survive. So that's just one example. But similarly, I mean, people take for granted they're not running around talking to each other and saying, you know what I really love? I really love that safe harbor and the ACA premium tax credit. But when you get hit with the tax bill because your income bumped up and you weren't prepared for that, then you suddenly have a new sort of set of stories and coverage and people being shocked and really frustrated and unprepared, right? So I think it's both about losing things that you might have, but also people can easily take for granted some of the protections that are in place right now.
And even just the risk of losing something, right? I don't think people have to lose it to have that be salient. So in the last couple minutes that we have with the two of you, I would love to maybe give you each an opportunity to close with a little bit of a preview of what we can expect in terms of the calendar in the coming year and change. I think we are starting to have a sense of reconciliation timing and some of the things that are going to happen. But for folks who maybe don't quite work day to day with Washington setting their schedule, but who work on these issues and could be helped with a little bit of a, maybe not a crystal ball. I don't know if Doug brought his crystal ball with him, but a little bit of a, here's what we expect timing wise for the next year or so. I know you'll be talking a little bit about this tomorrow, Indy, on your tax panel, but anything you want to share that helps people think about what's coming for the next year?
So I would say I've been trying to warn people that there are some things on the calendar already which are going to be hard and slow things down. So they've got to fund the government. That's in March. We know that we probably hit the debt limit about a half an hour ago. I felt we shook a little bit, but the Treasury's undertaking extraordinary measures, so they're going to have to suspend or raise the debt limit. And we're already seeing now that may be harder than anything else that they've bitten off here. So that's always consumes a lot of time, political energy, and has some political or some economic headwinds as well. The Senate has to confirm nominees, and so you can lose a lot of money betting on the Senate getting something done between now and June. They're really, there's not that much time on the calendar. They have a lot of headwinds. The idea that they would get the reconciliation bill done in the first 100 days, I don't see any way that happens. My current bet is Christmas Eve, and it is they can lose one vote in the House. That means every House Republican has a veto on the reconciliation bill. Getting to yes twice, once for the budget resolution, once for the reconciliation bill, is going to be an arduous process. And I'm really just thinking slower rather than faster. It's just going to be hard.
Andy, anything else you want to add?
Just two things. One is remember that one possible outcome is that the 2017 Trump tax law gets extended, which from my perspective is very challenging from a revenue perspective going forward, but nevertheless, that is a possible outcome, right? So they may not be able to get to agreement on something else, but they get to agreement on that as a backup, maybe temporarily extended. So just keep that in mind. That's why I actually think it's very possible. It also goes into December. The second thing, just for me to add, is the Senate often operates under unanimous consent just to move business along. Things like today's OMB memoranda will poison the well. So you will see a lot of Democrats probably coming out and saying, I'm not so sure that we need to have this vote on this nominee. Or I can.
That's already happened.
Yeah. Okay. So that you can slow all these things down, right? Yeah. So I think in general there's a lot of uncertainty, but things are going to feed off of each other. So it's not going to be completely random. They're going to try, they want to move fast, and they're going to hit obstacle after obstacle, and we'll see how much that slows them down.
Great. So as I said, lots more on this tomorrow at the Policy Summit, including in the tax policy panel that Indy will be moderating, which will get into a lot of those issues. But please join me in thanking Indy and Doug for giving us a little bit of a preview.